Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pixel Puzzle. If you have been with us on this journey, you know by now that visual effects don't live in a silo. They are not just added later, they're part of every creative decision, from the first sketches and pre-production to the way a scene is lit, blocked, and shot on set. And today, we are looking at that connection through the lens of cinematography. Literally. We have today with us Eben Bolter, cinematographer on projects like Cape Fear, The Last of Us, The Life of Chuck, and Slow Horses. Eben's work moves seamlessly between grounded, naturalistic storytelling and the most technically complex setups. And what stands out is how he brings visual effects into that process without ever losing the emotional truth of a scene. We'll talk about lighting for the unseen and why the most powerful visual effects are often the ones you don't notice at all. Eben, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. What a great intro.
I would love to start with your journey into cinematography. And but I also would love to hear from you. How have you lived the integration of VFX evolve over your career?
Yeah, my way into the industry was untraditional. I grew up a film lover, like we all did, really. And film was always this sort of impossible, mystical, amazing thing. I mean, I was obsessed with films and like Kubrick and Spielberg and you know all of the sort of I was going to say easy directors, all of the directors that we all grew up loving. I was obsessed with those films as I'm sure you were. But never at any point did I think that would be a thing I would like. The creation of films was never on my radar at all, not even 1%. It wasn't even there as a dream. It was just like, I don't know, special people do that somewhere else. It's nothing to do with me and my world. I grew up on the south coast of England. Never had any family or friends who had anything to do with the film industry, so it just couldn't have been more over there. But what I did think I could do with films potentially was, as I went to kind of college and university, I actually studied business studies and got into marketing. This is like a whole separate life. But I kind of thought, well, my love of film, maybe I could get into sales and distribution. Maybe you know, maybe I could work for a cinema chain or work for a film festival. I felt that my love of films, there's something I could maybe do with that from a kind of business, sales, marketing point of view. I just didn't quite know what that was. And there were a couple of interviews I had when I was probably 21, 22, looking for work experience, that had I got one of those two jobs, one was for HMV, one was for this international distributor of documentaries. I think if I'd got one of those two jobs, I would have gone down that route, and that's what I'd be doing. I'd be sales, distribution, whatever it is, something to do with finished films. But I didn't get those two jobs. I got a job for Viacom, who, you know, in this office dealt with outdoor advertising. And it was just a marketing office job in Camden Town. It was kind of just a fun office environment to be in. But it came up that they needed some vox pops, as they called them, basically filming interviews with people on the London Underground, asking if they'd seen advertising campaigns, kind of like Jack Daniels would do big like station, you know, Jack Daniels everywhere. And it was basically the job was interview people, film the advertising on the walls, edit it together in a 5-minute clip, and then we'd send that to the client who had paid for the advertising as kind of like a case study of what it looked like, how it went. And I kind of just found myself in the position of doing that. So they sent me on like a mini DV camera operating course. They sent me on a Final Cut Pro course. And it was my job to do the filming and to do the editing. And I had to deliver one video per week. And I did that for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And that, in a crazy way, was my film school, because as I kind of I didn't realize I had an inherent understanding of sort of composition and shots just based on loving films. I kind of knew it, because I knew films pretty well. I started to kind of realize this object in my hand, the camera, was a thing that I kind of understood inherently because I knew cinema. So I knew how to kind of compose a shot. I knew how to film a face, and I kind of started to realize, like, maybe that's a thing I could do one day. It was always going to be this like in the future type thing. Um, I'll try and make this quicker than the full version, but long story short, I moved to Japan. I got a job in Japan just again to sort of keep my life interesting. I didn't want to stay at this place Viacom and live in London in an office in and just it all felt a bit safe. I wanted to kind of try something difficult. So I moved to Japan and I ended up teaching English there just to get the visa, just to get a place to live. And that was around the time that Canon brought out the 5D Mark II firmware update that
Mm.
allowed video recording. And I happened to own a Canon 5D Mark II. And I happened to have been really getting into photography in Japan because what better place on this planet to learn photography? And that firmware update came out. I had it kind of, week one. And I would just go out and film stuff in Japan. And it was after the kind of training of those Vox Pops videos and having this camera in my hand and learning about photography more and more, and suddenly I could just basically do live action photography and control it. I really started to I started to come up with my own imagery, I guess. And because of, the kind of full frame, shallow focus nature of that moment in time, it felt very different to a lot of stuff out there, I think. And I could just basically exploit that. So I kind of realized maybe being a cinematographer is a thing I could do. And maybe it's time to move back to London and sort of set that as a goal. And because I had this sort of show reel of just Japanese imagery that was very shallow focus and, okay composed, I got a lot of jobs easily because I had this beautiful work relative to what you can achieve in London, I guess. And so I started shooting short films and then went down this sort of crazy rabbit hole of the sort of London short film scene. Long story
Mm.
short, ended up shooting over 100 short films.
Wow.
I would just take it was just like any job I could get, any drama, any comedy, any horror. It didn't matter if I thought the script was rubbish. It was just all a way to keep learning and working with actors. And
Mm.
it was something that I just sort of inherently felt I could do, and I had an affinity for, and I knew how to talk shots and I knew how to talk cinema. Um, and on every job, whether good or bad, I'd always learn something or meet somebody, and it just kind of kept building and building and building. And I think a really big kind of breakthrough for me was someone told me that if I wanted to be taken seriously as a cinematographer, I needed to get into the camera department on bigger jobs, work my way up. So I did try and do that, but I was already shooting. I was already kind of a DP in my
Mm.
head. So I found myself on a set, and all I wanted to do was look at the monitors. All I wanted to do was look at how they'd rigged the lights. I was the worst AC you can imagine because I wasn't thinking about the job of the AC. I was looking at the monitors like, why have they done it that way? And I just kind of
Mm.
realized I'm a DP, and maybe I'm the sort of worst or youngest or whatever DP, but I am a DP, and on every job I do, I'm going to hopefully get better. And maybe by being kind of a young, then new upcoming digital cinematographer, which was still a new thing, I can kind of exploit that by kind of challenging some of the ways people work. And I wasn't
Mm.
scared of digital, kind of digital was all I knew. So I found that I could kind of exploit that as like I could use an Alexa, whereas DPs who'd been working for 30 years maybe hadn't used an Alexa yet.
Mm.
So I just kind of leaned into that kind of new wave, do things my way thing as kind of a unique selling point. And, I winged it and here I am. So, that's a long life story. Apologies. But,
No, no,
I,
not at all.
I
Very,
think,
very interesting one. I mean, I think
mm,
it's unusual, and probably people can feel a lot more identified with your background than the regular kind
mm,
of like linear path into it.
mhm,
Did Japan influence you in any way? I mean, I know you talk about the scenery and how beautiful it was,
yeah.
but But did it do anything else to you? Because obviously there's a completely different perception in terms of artistic
Yeah,
direction and way of expressing. And did it do
yeah.
anything to you?
Oh, yeah, I mean, hugely. I think the two ways were, I mean, I'm half American. My mum's American, my dad's English. I grew up in the UK, but I always had an eye on moving to America. It was always going to be a thing I'd do one day. But I think by being in Japan, it kind of really taught me about the value of art, not just
Mm,
capitalist commerce, you know,
mm,
almost the exact opposite to America in a kind of cynical view, I guess. But really the kind of value of an artistic life and how if you achieve something artistically great, that kind of undercuts any sort of financial success, which is obviously another paradigm of success, but not the
yeah,
only
yeah.
paradigm of success. And I think it really gave me that kind of, I don't know if it's courage or confidence to just sort of, if you can make great art, that has an intangible value that isn't just about the number in your bank account, you know? And I think that was a really important thing for me to learn in Japan. And the other thing was just about their work ethic and how hard and how hard they work, how disciplined they are. They've got this, I think it's called Kaizen, is the kind of continuous improvement thing. And it just really taught me, I think, discipline that you can't, you know, if you want to do something exceptional, you have to be exceptional. You have to live up to what that image is in your mind. And it really gave me that feeling of like every single day, I need to be doing something to become a better cinematographer because everyone else out there who's trying to do what I'm doing is probably doing that. So every day I'm not
Mm,
doing something that gives me forward momentum, something I learn, something I watch, something I read, something I try, you know, every single day helps me keep up, helps me stay ahead, whatever it is. And if I'm not doing that, if I'm lazy, then I'm falling behind. And I think that's to do
mm,
with sort of not just experience and knowledge, but it's to do with relevance, I think, because, you know, the world is always changing.
yeah.
And I think, you know, there are HADs out there, there are cinematographers, there are directors, there are costume designers who are in their 80s, who are still incredibly relevant, who are still doing relevant, brilliant work, and they've adapted who they are to keep up with the world.
Mm,
But there's also people in their 20s, you know, Gen Z coming up now, who are bringing new things to filmmaking. And how do I stay relevant as they come up? And how do you keep evolving as
mm,
an artist to be, you know, true to who I am as an artist, but also, you know, how do I reflect the world that keeps on changing? I've got to
yeah,
understand that world and I've got to see what everyone else is doing. So it's an endlessly evolving thing.
yeah.
And I think, yeah, Japan was a huge influence on me in that way. Yeah.
Great. That's very interesting what you said. We talked to Hao Lee, and he mentioned that for him to, he's a professor and he's an expert in AI, specifically in
Hmm.
in defect technology, and he said that it was important to him that no matter how much he thought he knew, that he kept in contact with what the new generation was learning, because he
Yeah.
said that it's very easy to become irrelevant and talk to them, and they,
Hmm.
he said, like, I can't really keep up with what's happening, so that, they need to trust me. They need to know that
Hmm.
I keep evolving and I keep growing. Does it feel for you as the confidence grew? Because coming from, you just said, like, you've done 100 short films, no matter the quality.
Hmm.
As your profile and your confidence built up, did you feel it got more difficult or more easy to kind of like humble down and open up to that kind of development process?
Yeah, I don't know. It's both, I think. I look at what I did at the beginning of my career, and it's almost like looking at a photograph of yourself when you're a baby. And it's kind
Mm.
of like, oh wow, look at how cute I used to be, or whatever it is, or how good I used to be at playing tennis when I was 12, or whatever the thing is that you've now lost. And you can view yourself almost as a separate person. So I look back at
work I did 10, 15 years ago with a kind of like, I don't know what it is, envy at the blissful ignorance of inexperience, and how I used to just sort of maybe be a bit more risky, maybe be a bit more original, because the more you learn, the more you, I guess, you fall into the patterns of things that historically have worked. But obviously that makes your
Mm.
work safer. I think a big part of that is the job changes, because early in my career, I was doing short films, independent feature films, where really it's just pure creativity. There's no sort of money people saying, make sure you hit your day. You're just creating. And when you work in,
Mm.
high-end television, half of the job, arguably, is the management of how do we complete our day? How do we give the studio what they want? How do we have enough coverage to make sure we can change our mind later? Like, it becomes a much more sort of political um, job that you try desperately
Mm.
to hold on to art and creativity, but ultimately sometimes as a cinematographer, you genuinely can the success of a job can be more to do with, did they professionally complete the work, rather than
Mm.
did it look absolutely incredible. It really is a kind of a 50-50 thing. I think 50% of my job is, what does a show look like? The other 50% is more to do with how we made it, completing days on time, not going over budget, the management of crew, the management of a schedule, all of that stuff, I think truly is about 50% of the job. So yeah,
Mm.
I look back at the early years sort of jealous of how free I was creatively, I think. Yeah.
So it sounds like the typical kind of like life advice of enjoy the stages of your career applies here
Yeah.
as well, no? Because it sounds like you lose part of what it brought you into this, right?
Yeah. Like, it's, it's there's just pros and cons to it all. I think at the beginning there is, and it also, I guess I am aware that it sounds patronizing to be potentially jealous of people making short films for no money, because that's I remember being that person, and I would have given everything to be in the position I'm in now. So I know how fortunate I
Okay.
am. It's just that creatively, you're never more free than when you're just answering. It's you and a director pretty much, and you're just doing what you want,
Yeah.
making something up. And I think the more like young cinematographers can lean into that and take risks, that's
Yeah.
you're never going to be more free to be creative than then, whoever you are. Yeah.
Yeah. What about visual effects? Because I
Mm.
wanted to know if your view has changed, because I hear you talking about visual effects like 3 years ago.
Mm.
And it sounded to me like you talk about not being in control and
Hmm.
trying to be part of the process,
Yeah.
and the problems with growing the volume of visual effects
Hmm.
and so on. Has that changed?
Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing thing. I'm not afraid of visual effects. Like, because I think I
Mm.
started digitally, I've always been, um, I've always seen myself as a modern cinematographer who understands the digital world. And I've had my little, particularly at the beginning, I had my little fair share of figuring out After Effects and doing things myself. So I have done a lot of things like keying, and I have done, some rudimentary VFX myself, particularly at the beginning when we
Mm.
couldn't afford anyone VFX. So it's never been a thing I've shied away from. And now where I am now is, I think everything is a little bit transitional, particularly with AI coming in, and particularly with costs and the state of the world and everything else. Like, it's a
Mm.
particularly transitional time right now. I try to, my approach to VFX at the moment is I try to be very clear about the artistic intention for an idea. And hopefully the idea is coming from the director and I. And then hopefully we're bringing VFX in a collaborative way to either deliver that vision through the kind of lens that we're proposing, or
Mhm.
to supplement and enrich that idea in a way that we haven't thought of. But I think the only thing with VFX that bumps me is when, and this is rare, but if you get a VFX company or people or whatever who sort of tell you how to shoot it in a way that 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 can become sort of detrimental, I think, to the overall what we're trying to do here, and it becomes the cookie cutter version. I much prefer making it a little bit difficult for VFX if that ends up being a better idea, or taking it away from VFX, to be honest. You know, if we sort of default too quickly to, well, obviously this is a VFX shot, I quite like to be like, well, is it a VFX shot? And the opposite can be true. You know, sometimes something that people think, oh, that will definitely just be practical, or definitely location, or definitely SFX, maybe I'll be like, well, actually, I think this is way better VFX. Particularly when it comes to things like action, shooting guns, knives, squibs, all of that stuff. You know, often these days, as much as a in-camera person I am a lot of the time, if doing things with VFX are going to give us a better, more repeatable result, we're going to get more takes and we're going to get more time to do another scene. I love those conversations where we're talking about, you know, alternate methodology for filmmaking using VFX. But yeah, I don't, yeah, I mean, I did a Marvel job, and there was a very sort of, this is how it's done here approach to some of that I didn't love. And my big thing at the moment, just to give you an example of something where I've tried to kind of progress things from a cinematography side, is Slow Horses season 6, which isn't out for a whole year. It's not out till 2026, I don't believe. It's not the one that's coming out soon. It's the one after that. But we set out on day one of that to use no green or blue screens. And that came from my frustration with how it negatively impacts lighting, how it negatively impacts despill and control of light. And I was sort of like, I feel like we're at the stage now where we don't really need green or blue. We can use gray. We can use like a luma key. We can use black, white, gray. And that's going to give me a way better environment to light the set in a more kind of organic feeling way. Like if we can't do volume, if we can't do screens, let's at least use gray, because then I suddenly have a big soft source out of the window to light skin tones in a sort of friendly way, rather than having to deal with, you know, keeping green and blue reflections out of skin, spill, all of that. So on Slow Horses, we set out to not use a single green or blue, which we did. And it worked incredibly well. Like, it was great. I think it's sort of the most positive, collaborative VFX experience I've had. And I've carried that through now onto Cape Fear, where we're again using grey screens for everything. And it's amazing. I kind of think I'm done with green and blue. I don't know. I mean, I think that maybe there's like, I think there's been one shot on Cape Fear where we did pull the blue out because it was a particular situation that was fair enough. But that's been the sort of thing I sort of try to do, is sort of ask the questions as to, well, why are we still doing that? Is that really necessary? What can we do to advance it? Or, you know, I try to keep up on what everyone else is doing around me. And if I see someone else doing something like that, like I just saw, I think it was on Instagram, someone using a gray screen, and it was like, what's a gray screen? And, you know, now I know, and they're great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, I don't imagine that being too different from, you know, when you start in cinematography and you know the dolly, you know, the crane, you know, the jib.
Yeah.
But you don't really know, you know, Nolan's army of like, you know, complex kind of like mechanics.
Yes.
Around, like, and you don't really learn that from one day to another. You don't really jump from having a you know, Russian arm to kind of like completely bend a half of a city, right? I think there's a progression.
Absolutely.
I think VFX is just like that. Like, it's how much you know, and I think also is how much you, when you don't know, how much you are at the expense of the advice that you get.
Yes.
And how much you know, how much chemistry there are, how much communication, is it good advice, bad advice, who you're working with, but like any other department, I guess. But But yeah, so it always interests me to know from the other side, because we in visual effects have similar experiences where you talk about the studio. I think a lot of people are shocked to hear that we in visual effects prefer not to use visual effects. Like our dream use of visual effects is actually invisible visual effects. Is when you cannot tell the difference.
Love that.
So we die every time that you can see it. We actually die, and there are examples where I used to hate. I came through a personal journey as well of loving art house cinema, because I discovered it quite late, and then I started watching Cassavetes and Herzog and I thought, like, well, fuck Hollywood, like this is cinema, right? Like this is the real deal. Like look at this, like this is incredible. And I almost kind of like made the mistake of pushing away the the blockbuster pieces, the superhero movies and stuff like that. But when I start working in visual effects, I discovered that in the same way that good, like, traditional cinema is is good for story and is good for for character in general. The big kind of like blockbusters sometimes can push the technology where it is and where it can get. And I think I heard you talking about the virtual production, which what you said was completely true about not being ready, but people selling it. But I think also, if you don't do that, then how do you get people to invest and develop that technology, right?
Totally.
And I think that's what people miss sometimes. That sometimes you just miss, you don't hit the mark. But it's just because you're taking a massive gamble, and it's not about making it perfect. It's about, I'm going to try it, and you have the backup of the studio, and then you just go for it. And it's, it can happen or might not happen. But what comes after that, like films that comes after that, are able to take advantage of that massively.
Yeah, absolutely, totally, 100% agree, exactly. And I think like the kind of melding of art house directors and big budget Hollywood filmmaking and what that's done for VFX, I think Denis Villeneuve really has been at the forefront. And I think what he did with Greg Fraser on Dune and what he did with Roger Deakins on Blade Runner, was like such a glorious example of using all the tools in the box in the right way, using miniatures, using VFX extension, using practical photography in such an artful, soulful way. And I think one thing that both Roger Deakins and Greg Fraser have in common, that's a thing that I aspire to help change, I think is the way of putting it, is that one of the biggest problems that, in my opinion, with the work that at least I'm doing and VFX at the moment, is how cinematographers get cut out of the post process, the review process, usually just financially, because producers don't want to pay us anymore. And I think so often now, particularly when it's a project I care about with directors who I'm friends with, directors will be doing VFX review and they'll say, what's wrong with this shot? And I'll be like, oh, well, they haven't done the same bokeh we've got, or they haven't, or the background's too sharp relative to the midground, or whatever it is. There's usually an optical reason that a director doesn't quite have the tools to articulate. They just know it feels wrong. And it's really difficult as a cinematographer to reinsert myself into the process of trying to help. It's never a case of like, I know better than everyone. It's more just like, surely you want the person who shot it to be part of the conversation as we try to figure out this thing. Because usually it's a case of, okay, is it A, B, or C? I don't know. There's three skies for a sky replacement. Which one is it? And normally I'll be the person who's like, well, the way I lit it on the ground in the foreground was thinking it was going to be this kind of thing. So I think B is going to meld with my photography the best. And really no one else could know that. It's more an intention thing. It's more this is what I imagined when I lit the scene. And even, no one knows that but me. And I think the more the collaboration can continue through post, I think the better it is for everyone, because it's just it's more information basically that otherwise you could never know.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you work with visual effects, if you jump on a job and you know that there's going to be a lot of visual effects in it, do you prepare differently?
Yeah, I mean, normally I will, it depends in what way. I mean, I think Slow Horses, probably because I'm going through post on that right now, is in my mind a lot. And that was the grey screen job. And that was an interesting one because I got to come in. Slow Horses has been around for 5 seasons before I started, but they let each season be its kind of own movie. It's kind of like doing, in a way, it's like doing a Bond film. It's like there's a continuity of certain Bond things, but each movie is its own movie. And that's kind of how they treat Slow Horses. So every season you really can kind of start again in a lot of ways. So I got to kind of look at it from what's happened to this point. And there were certain decisions with certain sets. Like there was a very big glassy set that happened to be a blue screen set. And I just was like, it's such a big glassy environment and we're just washing blue or green and it's just right there and we're losing. So that was one where I talked about VFX and talked about the gray screen, but we actually decided to go to the translite route because so that we could use more reflective reflections and more correct ambient lighting. And it became a conversation about, okay, they're going to animate elements of the translite, and that's going to kind of give us everything. Because when we're really shallow focus and maybe we're even doing practical rain on the windows, it's just going to look completely great in camera. And then if we're on a very sharp wide shot and it's not raining, we're going to need a bit of VFX help, but they're going to be building on top of a good exposed image with the right colors. And if they're animating a plane into the sky or something, that's a kind of additional thing to elevate it rather than kind of having to do everything with all the limitations of a blue screen and despill and everything else. So that was a really good example, I think, of just looking at everything anew and being like, hey, this set, let's do a video wall. This set, let's do a translite. This set is definitely VFX. Let's do gray screen for all the reasons mentioned. And, stunts, it would be a case of, okay, how much time and practical and physical money is doing whatever the idea is practically versus VFX helping us. And it was just always a kind of give and take negotiation with producers, with schedule, and with VFX to talk about what's going to give us the best result or what's going to give us the most time and money to use elsewhere on like bigger picture conversations. So yeah, there was a lot of VFX kind of innovation or rethinking of ideas for Slow Horses 6, which was great. For Cape Fear, VFX has been a much smaller factor, to be honest, because it's quite an in-camera. There hasn't been much need for it. And something like The Last of Us, season 1 of The Last of Us, which was a huge VFX job. It was reasonably simple in some ways in that sort of foreground and midground we tried to do as practically as possible, and then the far background was always going to be VFX extension. So it always was a conversation about how we kind of make the most of that, how we integrate the most seamlessly. And they were a particularly generous and confident VFX team where certain shots I had assumed we would lock off a camera and animate it later. Alex and his team on The Last of Us would always say, no, just do what you do. Shoot it. Just shoot it handheld, motion blur, whatever, we'll fix it. They were very filmmaker friendly, even if it made their work harder later. They wanted to liberate as much realness as possible, which was, very liberating. But I think that's what you want, is a kind of give and take collaborative back and forth. It's for me, it's knowing the implications of what I'm doing. If it's going to save $500,000 to lock off a camera, we should lock off the camera, right? But if it's going to create a better overall scene, if we can shoot it exactly with the way we want, and it's going to make it more difficult for VFX, then so long as that's all said and understood, we can make that decision together.
Yeah, absolutely. What about lighting?
Yeah, the scale side of things very early on. I don't know. I kind of somehow gained the confidence with scale just to think of things simply. Like if you're going to light a small area a certain way, just scale it up. And so I've always tried to just sort of not be too intimidated by massive sets and just scale up very simple philosophies, like what time of day is it? How do I want it to feel? What's the correct storytelling atmosphere? Usually, what's the weather? That's usually the real conversation. Is it sunny? Is it cloudy? Is it raining? Is it nighttime? If it's nighttime, is it moonlight? What are the practical sources? And all of that. It's a mixing of real and film reel, and you're just trying to kind of push and pull where we are on the kind of literal versus storytelling scale, particularly for something like Moonlight. And then with VFX integrating into that, it's just about communicating those ideas as clearly as possible, so that if I've lit, I don't know, a big space for Moonlight, and I'm relying on VFX to paint out maybe some cranes and some big lights that we can see in shot, and to replace them with a sky that feels, optically, photographically in line with my lighting. It's about communicating things. I mean, one thing, Moonlight in particular, I think Moonlight is sort of inherently fake, really. It's a film thing. The way we shoot Moonlight for film isn't realistic. It's more like a feeling. It's more a tonal. It's more a storybook impression of what Moonlight is. And one thing I try to always talk to VFX about is that I'm not precious about where the moon is. There isn't one moon that's always got to be in that one perfect place. So long as a shot feels moonlit, that's better. So usually I'm not a person who's asking them to put a big moon in the sky to justify where my light's coming from. It's more a feeling of like moonlit clouds in a sky, so that every single shot has that same feel. Same goes for sunlight, by the way. I'm of the belief that the literal feeling of sunlight, if you look at one person in the real sun backlit, and then pan over here and look at a real person front lit by the sun, and cut between those two shots, even though it's completely literal and real, it can give the audience an impression of two different times of day. Hazy backlit and hard front lit doesn't necessarily feel like the same thing. So I'm not afraid to move the sun around shot by shot and not get too bogged down in sort of the science of where the sun should be, because I don't think anyone really cares about that. It's more about feel. And this should feel like low, hazy, yellow, autumnal sun or something like that. And then it's a case of how do you, across all of the shots, how do you kind of keep that feeling going, and how does VFX keep that illusion going as well? So it's all just a kind of a conversation.
Does it make it scary, that process of not knowing exactly what you're going to get, and work with that on set when you're there?
Yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, this is the scary thing with VFX, and I think the thing that isn't fair to VFX, because there are so many incredible VFX artists, and I do think VFX is an area of filmmaking that general audiences who don't really know anything about actual filmmaking will criticize, will tease. You'll get viral clips of terrible VFX, and usually what's happened there is other people's incompetence or time or organization or budget has forced those VFX artists into a position where they're not able to deliver good work. And I've been on both sides of that, of being disappointed by a VFX shot, and it being because they weren't given enough time or money to deliver good work, and it just kind of makes everyone look bad. It's a pretty awful position to be in, which I think just comes back to sort of the pressures of filmmaking and money. But I think if you're as organized and as thoughtful and as collaborative as you can be on set, it's hopefully going to streamline the process as much as possible in post and give it every chance of being good.
I think when people think of VFX, mainly people think of spectacle, and I think not many people think about the bread and butter, or the changing the weather, extending a set, or making the world feel consistent in many ways. Like that's a very small use of visual effects, like that's the Revenant, that's the Berman, that's I don't know, a Fincher's movie. Like you wouldn't really guess that They have like a big number of shots.
Yeah.
But you don't see them.
Yeah.
You don't notice them. And I think that's a very good use of visual effects.
Me too.
But that doesn't really make money or build an industry around it, right?
No.
But what's an example you would give with your experience of subtle VFX in your work that audiences wouldn't notice but played a crucial role in the story?
It's usually to do with location. There's a Netflix movie I did called Night Teeth. It's a terrible title. Excuse me. It's a vampire movie. It's a film that we had a very bold visual aesthetic, and really, me and the director had a lot of fun shooting that. Like visually, it's one of my favorite things I've done. But we had to shoot it in New Orleans, but the film was set in Los Angeles. So we would end up on this beautiful New Orleans, cobbled street with Spanish moss, and it was gorgeous. And we'd have to turn the other way and look at the brick wall that felt like downtown LA. And because, the budget of that film, I think was 25 million. It was reasonable, but we didn't have the time necessarily for art department to just bring LA to New Orleans. So it was constantly about how do we make this feel seamlessly like it's Los Angeles, not like we're putting the Hollywood sign in every shot, but what are the little things we can do to just make it feel like LA? And that was things like putting in palm trees just on generic streets, and making the depth that little bit sort of warmer and hazier, and putting in a high rise here and there. And it was just that feeling of LA. I think VFX did a great job in that movie, is just keeping that language going. I don't think anyone would ever really think about that. It would just be like, oh yeah, they've made it in LA. But we didn't, it was New Orleans. So that's the first one that came to mind. There's a scene in The Last of Us, episode 4, where Joel and Ellie go for a drive. It's like a road trip thing. And basically half of the work in the car is poor man's process in a studio with, I think it was blue screen at the time, and lighting. And half of it is on a process trailer out on the road in the real world. And I'm quite proud of how seamless that is. Most people can't spot which is which. Even I pretty much will forget, if I'm honest. I looked at it as a reference for Cape Fear, and sometimes I'm like, I think this was blue screen, I think this is real, and I actually have to go back to my DIT dailies just to sort of remind myself which was which. So I think that was a very successful situation that no one would really, again, think about, which is what you want. Yeah.
That's always a good sign. We get a lot of daily sessions where the supervisor sits in the session, and the first thing he asks is, what am I looking at? It's like, well, that's a good start.
Yeah, true. Yeah. No, that's same for me in the grade, in the color. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, I don't remember whatever that thing was there, and they'll be like, oh, it wasn't, it's VFX, and it's like, damn, that's good. Yeah. that's how it should be.
What about yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and again, this is how we would like to be. Like that's our dream. Like, every single visual effects artist want their job not to be noticed.
Yeah.
It's the best compliment they can get. What about practical effects? Because they obviously live together. I think a lot of people tend to separate them, not realizing that actually the majority of the times is a blend of both.
Yeah.
And is often what is more successful as well.
Yeah.
Have you had experience with needing to blend both of them, and how that goes into your process?
Yeah, I mean, the main one that came to mind straight away, probably because I'm doing Cape Fear, is rain. I love
Mm.
texture. I love, I love wind machines. I love rain where appropriate. I always want something happening. I don't like cold, sterile, still frames. So I'm always looking for excuses for something to be happening, whether it's a tree blowing in the distance or whatever it is, just some interaction so the world feels kind of dynamic and alive. And on both Slow Horses season 6 and Cape Fear, rain, it has been a huge factor. So, rain machines, rain towers, doing all of that practically. Those SFX people are incredibly skillful, but there's only so much they can do. So normally you're talking about, okay, cover the actors. Maybe there's a curtain in front of the camera. We're seeing that car, so hit that car. And we're seeing this tree very clearly, so hit that tree. But then you're really relying on VFX to fill in the things we can't do and to deal with the floor and puddles. And, I think that is a really big one. Like when that is harmoniously successful, it's really great what you can achieve with rain, with SFX and VFX in harmony. It's very difficult, obviously. And I think VFX in particular get the short end of the stick there. Like quite often you're trying to key through a curtain of rain to put in a puddle and rain, and it's messy, but it can be done incredibly well. Yeah, that's the first one that comes to mind. Lightning. I mean, I've done quite a lot of sort of lightning effect storms, and it's great to be able to, if I'm doing on-set flashes, to once in a while sync that up with seeing a flash. Visually can be great. Did that in The Last of Us. Fire extension is a big one. Episode 5 of The Last of Us, we did tons. There's that big fire thing that happens. And you do as much as you can practically to give the motivation, to give the one element of it being like almost like just an in-camera photo reel reference for then VFX to work from and extend and embellish and hide the tanks and the things we shouldn't be seeing. So that's another big one. So it's usually it's usually sort of elemental is the first thing that comes to mind for me when you ask that. Yeah. And the other thing that I just thought of just now is that I think as cinematography or filmmaking in general is changing, like I think we're going through one of these stages right now where the tech has become somewhat normalized. And I think it's very easy to make something look good right now. So I think on the higher end of things, people are now trying to innovate. And I think that's one reason why we've gone back to film on a lot of productions, is it's just a way to differentiate and stand out and be bold using a completely different formula. And I'm very sort of LUT dependent. I like to have a very bold in-camera LUT and try and really kind of, like on both Slow Horses 6 and Cape Fear, both of my LUTs have been really strong, like notably it's a heavy look. And that's been really fun working with VFX to make sure their world feels the way it feels like the real world, but through that LUT. And I think that's been a really interesting thing. And that's something I'm always thinking about, is if I got my opportunity to make a $200 million movie with a big director and they wanted to sort of show people something they've never seen before, like what is that? And how do I utilize every element of filmmaking that I can control, including VFX, to show audiences something they haven't seen before? And so you're always sort of, there's that push and pull again of like art and real life and just sort of trying to find something new with all these tools we have. And as things get better and easier, just making the most of that. And in a very sort of small way, the gray screen feels like a good example of that to me right now, that it's giving me more speed and a quicker ability to light quickly on set using gray screen. And there doesn't seem to be a cost to that from a VFX perspective. That only seems to be an advantage, that the despilling has gone and the VFX just feels a bit more integrated as a starting point, at least, rather than having to get back to integrated. You're kind of starting from an integrated position. So that's been a thing I've really enjoyed recently. And it'll be interesting how much better that gets as kind of keying gets easier and easier,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love to have a conversation with you in 5 years, because you said now something that I can see you going into the dark side, very, doing something that hasn't been done before. That's the beginning of the end, right? That's
because we tried with 3D and it didn't, 3D's kind of gone away.
Yeah.
James Cameron's kind of keeping it around, and high frame rate. Maybe there's a world where high frame rate is a thing eventually, but I've got my own thoughts on why that doesn't work, at least yet. So high frame rate, 3D, I think augmented reality, virtual reality, if everybody starts wearing glasses and headsets, that may come back around, particularly 3D may come back around again.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, they're going to try and sell TVs, 8K televisions and virtual reality goggles and whatever it is. And how are we going to integrate that to make the best visuals possible without it just being a gimmick? I always think that's always the thing. So I'm very interested in all of that. Yeah.
Is there anything that you would have done differently, or that you would kind of like wish that you have known, or how to approach where you were before you kind of like jump into big projects?
Not really. I mean, I definitely am better objectively at my job now than I was 10 years ago, but I don't know if I'm better. I don't know if I have better taste. I don't know if, it's more about, the kind of efficiency, and, you have to experiment. You have to kind of get a few things wrong to know what works for you and what you like. And so along the way, there's definitely things where I look at now and I think, oh, I wish I'd done that way, or I wish I hadn't done that. But there was no way I could have known until I'd done it.
You could have known
and tried it. And sometimes, because of the beauty of filmmaking, sometimes the way that you fail, the way that you get things wrong, can make something more interesting. Or better. It might not be exactly what you were aiming for, but maybe you ended up somewhere even more interesting by failing. I do that all the time. And I think, more and more, I try to be, in some ways, I try to be looser. I try to be a bit more, like on Cape Fear right now, I'll sort of, with my gaffer, I'll sort of say, I want this to feel like there's a big beam of sunlight coming into the room and hitting the floor, and it's creating this glowing warmth from above. Let's see how that feels. And, I'm not kind of dictating exactly what that light is, exactly what the angle is, what else we've got rigged. It's more a kind of philosophical idea of the light, and let's see what that does. And usually when you kind of have that kind of let's see what that does approach, kind of little magical accidents will happen, or little things you hadn't expected will happen, and it'll be like, oh cool, look how that's bouncing off the thing, or look at how the vase is reflecting, or whatever it is. And you've just got to kind of be alive to catching that stuff, to create an environment, and try to have a vision, and try to implement that vision, but also be alive to the things you can't control, because there's so many things in filmmaking that you can't control. Where an actor's going to stand, you can have this great idea for this great shot, and it's all going to be great, and then the actor's going to come up with an incredibly logical reason why they would never do that, and you've got to be ready to react to that, and be a little bit sort of looser and more flexible to all of the eventualities of filmmaking, and not just your one specific craft.
We say we keep hearing a lot that about failure, and how the modern societies is more, and is kind of like more open to accept failure and the importance of failure in growth, but I guess in filmmaking that's amplified in many ways, no? Because you always, in some sort of percentage, you're always working with the unknown, right? And
totally.
And if you not allow yourself to fail, it means that you not take the necessary risk to actually discover new things.
That reminds me that a producer friend who worked on the Planet Earth series, the BBC documentaries, the Attenborough stuff, we were talking once, and she said that the reason that the BBC managed to innovate in nature documentaries so well with the Planet Earth series and Life and whatever else is they would essentially send out 3 crews to get 3 risky stories, but they budgeted for only 1 of the 3 succeeding. So it was okay for every 2 out of 3 crews that go out to find a story to fail, because the 1 in 3 that hit, they would get a story that's never been captured before, people hadn't seen before. And by taking those creative risks and allowing them to fail, they ended up with work that no one had ever seen before. And I think about that a lot, because there is a real, I've got a family and kids. I can't be taking such big swings creatively that I keep getting fired, because I've got to feed my kids. I need a job. And the realities of filmmaking are you can't really fail on a day-to-day basis, but you've got to kind of try and push things slightly outside of the comfort zone, because if they do hit, you're going to end up with something a little bit more interesting, maybe.
Yeah. I guess it's learning when you are under that amount of pressure and scrutiny. It's more kind of like an exercise of learning what the boundaries are, right? And
yeah.
So do you have a common mistake that you see filmmakers make when they plan in visual effects for a scene?
I don't know about, I don't know. I mean, like I said, my approach is always to sort of, to initially not worry too much about VFX or SFX or production design, but just to kind of come up with the vision and then try to figure out how to do that. I think I don't know. Everyone's different, right? It's hard to kind of criticize the way anyone else does it. Like, I'm not in any way the authority on anything. But maybe the only thing I'd say is that for younger cinematographers who feel less confident in VFX, just to liberate them to be more confident, to not to just have your vision and collaborate and talk to people, and don't worry that you haven't done things before, because no one's done everything before. It's okay. Something came up yesterday. There was a shot that came up yesterday that all of us were like, oh, I've never done that before. I can't think what it was for some reason. It was as simple as, we have a shot planned where we want to do a zoom on somebody's eyes on a zoom lens that zooms out to seeing the whole front windscreen of a car, but we want to do it practically at night on the move. And it was just one of those things where it was like, I've never done that before. For what, like that particular chemistry of situation and shots, I've never done it before. And we were talking about doing it on a stage with VFX, but I actually was like, if Scorsese had done this in 91 Cape Fear, he would have done it practically. And there's something about a shot that's that difficult, that doing it practically, it's almost the errors, the bounciness, the whatever it is gonna, I think, for that moment, give that shot a bit more trajectory, a bit more realism, a bit more of a visceral feel. And I'm not saying you couldn't do it with VFX, because I'm sure you could, but you would have to then go into it in VFX on a stage with the philosophy of, let's make it bouncier than we want it, and we know that when we're starting this close of someone's face bouncing on the road, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be this magical, impossible, like a video game, perfect pull out. It's going to have a little bit of wonkiness to it. And yeah, that's an example of something I've never done before, and we're going to lean into the practical version of that, based on what I just said. But maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe I'll regret that. I don't know. It's going to be what it is, and then next time we do it, I'll have learned from that. And what is wrong? Maybe some people would prefer the perfect version. Some people would prefer the practical version. It's just taste,
Yeah, I think it stays about also one thing that you said that is so true is that how would I have known if I didn't have a clue, right? And I think when these things happen is kind of, people are so adamant to trying to search perfection and the best. We in this culture of who's the best, who's the number one, who's the and and sometimes it just doesn't really matter. I mean, things change. You might see that and might approach it differently because of the time and you live in, the experience you have done. But at that moment in time, that my work and might make you happy. But how
Mm.
many accidents in cinema that where people thought something specific they've done was awful and was terrible, and then it became kind of like an iconic scene, or and it was completely accidental, and they didn't even like it at the time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Gordon Willis, The Godfather, he nearly got fired. It's, couldn't be more iconically made. Conrad Hall, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, similar thing. None of us know everything, and it's all just taste. And it's funny watching people review things sometimes, because people review things through their own prism of their own expectation. Like often, if you go to see, let's say, the new Paul Thomas Anderson movie, you go in with an expectation of this is going to be great. So then your enjoyment of it is based on your own expectation of this is going to be great. Versus sometimes you'll go see a film with a $500,000 budget at a little festival and you've never heard of anyone in it, and it's like, wow, that was incredible, based on your expectation. And it's so funny how you sort of go into something thinking it will be one thing, and you basically review it against your version of what that thing is. It's a really interesting process. I've gone through it very recently with The Life of Chuck, because that was a movie that, a lot of love went into the making of it, and some of the reviews were mostly good. It's like 80% Rotten Tomatoes, but some of the worst reviews were from some of the biggest critics, and it was just interesting sort of reading their review, and you realize the review is more about them and their life, and it's like, are you actually reviewing the film, or are you sort of telling me that you're a sad person? You know what I mean? Like it was really interesting reading some of those reviews, and at a certain point you're like, you're not even talking about our movie anymore. It's an interesting thing.
It's very it's very subjective. I mean, with critics, it's a different level, right? Because that's a job. So you need to get out there and get followers and get reactions. And I think that social media have taught us that lesson, that you can raise and sink whatever you want if you have enough followers and you know what buttons to push. So let's talk about the future, if you are for it, because it feels right now things are moving not only fast but very, very drastically. Like things are. I don't really remember. I mean, I think I'm gonna sound like one of those old people that used to tell us when we were 13 or 14. I don't think I remember a time like this, and looking at history, where we not only kind of like lost a bit, but we don't really have a clue what's coming. And I think it's not only AI. I mean, it's a big part of it. And the influence of it, but it's all the transition in between the streaming and the collapse of the traditional film studios and everything else, like the format, everything is happening at once. And I was wondering, is this affecting you right now, or is this affecting you? I mean, how is this affecting you personally, but also how do you see this affecting your role as a cinematographer in the next 5-10 years, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big thing. I think particularly AI, it can get a bit existential crisis. I mean, I'm very lucky to be a working cinematographer already. If I was coming in trying to break into the industry right now, that would be even more scary, I think, for just where things are going. I think there's always going to be, I mean, at the end of the day, we're telling stories, and stories are going to evolve. The world's going to evolve. People are always going to want to watch and experience and even play stories with video games. And taste is always a thing. I think, as AI, even right now, I mean, the biggest problem with AI is how derivative it all is. I think AI very much challenges derivative work, because it is inherently derivative. It uses, learning models based on existing work to create something that looks like existing work. It's inherently derivative. And I think, there will be advantages to AI in terms of streamlining process or making things quicker and easier, just like computers. I mean, I think AI is a funny sort of AI has become like a particular trigger for particularly the film industry when, is there really so much difference between AI and Photoshop? We've always sort of been able to do the same thing. It's more just to do with speed, efficiency. So I hope that we can use AI to advance the art form and to there's always going to be human input, and hopefully those tools just going to kind of simplify and streamline the quality of the output work. But that's always going to require the human taste and interaction. And I hope that 10 years from now, I don't know, if Hollywood decided to go really big on AI filmmaking and do things less practically, I think there will always need to be some sort of a visual storyteller to help a director advance what that art form is. I really hope it doesn't become so drastic that we stop filming actors on sets. I don't think that's 10 years away, but who knows? And for me, it's about just staying up to date with everything. It's just keeping on top of it and dipping my toes into using AI so I understand it. My one I guess in some ways I'm lucky that I have I don't have, but I video games has always been in my life as well. And there's a lot of overlap. There's more and more overlap with sort of the skill set I've developed and video games, and going to places like Naughty Dog and talking to their lighting engineers and developers and talking about what video games can take from modern cinematography to make those worlds a bit more tangible, a bit more real feeling. But that's for me, that I'm kind of trying to keep that world alive as something that I'm partly involved in. And I think, I've got young kids and I can't always be traipsing off around the world to shoot stuff. So, the idea of working from home a little bit more on maybe like a CGI animated movie at some point is appealing to me. And maybe that becomes cutscenes for video games or video game lighting. That's one area that I'm just trying to kind of keep alive and not make it completely, I'm just a physical, practical cinematographer for movies and TV. I want to kind of, visual storytelling is really what I'm interested in. And so I am aware of trying to kind of keep my options open for the future for that. Yeah.
Oh, well, you really sound now like a modern cinematographer, because I think a lot of cinematographers, a lot of professionals are struggling to break through that kind of identity crisis. I think it's like, if you think about it, like if the old kind of school traditional analog versus digital had so much of an impact in the community, so big, big, created like a big division that lasted for years and years and years. Imagine what the process of adapting to accepting this as a form of art would be like, because the new generations will jump, the next generation will find it weird, the next one will find it the norm, right? And we will kind of like float around, like if people like you who are ready to jump into something else and adapt and survive, that will be one thing. But a lot of people probably won't be able to. Like they will kind of like get stuck in that transition. I mean, it's a big difference. It's not like analog versus digital.
No.
It feels, the scale feels much bigger, right?
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. I mean, I hope I can carry on doing what I'm doing, and then hopefully I can just be a part of innovating that world. Just like I think Greg Fraser right now is innovating what cinematography is. I hope to be that sort of a DP myself, and it doesn't mean I don't respect what's happened before. It's just about the right tool for the right story. Like if I was doing a Western, and the director wanted it to feel like a Leone old-fashioned Western, I'd probably shoot it on film too, and I probably would go down that kind of analog philosophy for that story. But if another director came to me with a script and said, I want to look at a Western in 2025, and what can we do with a Western now that makes it not like Leone? Well, how do we modernize a Western? That's a completely different job. And you've got to take that job for what that job is. And then it would be my job to innovate in that way. And so that's the thing is, I think as a cinematographer, I'm not a solo artist. I'm ultimately supplementing and helping a director tell their story visually. And so it's always going to come from a director's, this is what I want this to be. So I'm very aware of that it's not, I'm not just in a vacuum and it's me making a thing. I usually join a project a year after a director has been living with it. And so, you know, really it's my job to take what they're envisaging and make it better, make it more, make it the best version of that I can.
Yeah. Do you have a particular vision yourself for what cinematography should be now, and do you think would be in 10 years?
Well, a thing I think about a lot right now is, I think personally, this is just my subjective opinion, that the best digital cinematography right now looks like analog cinematography. And I think that's a really interesting dichotomy. Like, it's just, that's inherently strange. I think, like, if you look at sort of I don't know, say at the Oscars, like the last 15 nominees for best cinematography or something, most of them, I mean, a lot of them have shot film, I should say, but the ones that have shot digital tend to use LUTs and color grading and color science that makes it feel more analog. And so I agree with that. I do the same thing. I think, but I think that's inherently interesting, that the best of digital is making it look like film. So I'm really interested in, how do we not do that? Like how do we make digital cinematography the best version of digital cinematography that isn't just kind of copying 35 mil like analog celluloid and making it slightly weirder? Like, there must be a version of digital cinematography that isn't, you know, even saying digital cinematography to me sounds negative. It sounds like a criticism. Like, people will say it looks like a Netflix movie, it looks very digital, and they don't mean it as a compliment. And I'm interested who's going to figure out a way to kind of, because, you know, celluloid, the way Kodak got to their Vision 3 is over, you know, well, 100 years of photochemistry, of playing with celluloid to enhance skin tone and make it feel like this and make it feel like that. And that's built up a kind of history within all of us, that we grew up watching those films, so that it feels a certain way. But if you actually look at what it's doing with kind of orange reds and desaturating this and making, like, all of those things are kind of weird. We've just got used to it and we love it because of the history of film. But I just think it's like, surely there's something in digital where we can pull the image apart in a new way, kind of like Bleach Bypass reinvented how analog cinematography could look. Bleach Bypass for a while was like, wow, look at this, and everyone was doing it. Like, what's going to be the digital thing that is a new look that no one's done before, where everyone's like, wow, have you seen what this thing looks like? It doesn't look like film, it doesn't look like digital, it's doing something new. I'm very interested in who's going to crack that, or who's going to use HDR in a new way that we haven't seen before. Or there's surely like an innovation to come that we can't imagine yet. I don't know what that is. Enhanced dynamic range, enhanced color science. And I'm just, yeah, I'm very interested in that. And yeah, hopefully I can have my little say in that at some point as well.
That's very interesting. I mean, how far can we get? Like, because we've been seeing this for a while, right? Like, the resolution first was the resolution fever, like, it's 4K, now it's 6K, it's like 8K, like, and now I've seen 16K recently, which is like, why? I mean, what? For what reason? But and then, you know, I completely appreciate that the color science is real. I mean, it's a real advancement, like, from, you know, for the last 10 years or whatever. It is a real advancement. But in terms of, like, you know, high dynamic range, and apart from the technicalities of what can get you, you know, the use of less light, or, like, you know, to achieve the semblance of whatever it is. what is it for? I
Mm.
mean, what is it going to do for the format?
Mm-hmm,
You know,
mm-hmm.
that and what other aspects of it can actually improve or change?
Yep.
It feels like the only way forward is format related rather
Mm-hmm.
than, you know, keep enhancing those technical aspects around it. No,
Yeah.
I mean, it's how I feel about it, but it's my personal opinion.
Yeah. So one of my takes on that is, I think it's quite hard to. So I got to this via The Hobbit, and why I didn't like high frame rate, and what I kind of realized was, I think one thing about, if you sit back and watch Lord of the Rings, 24 frames per second analog film, there's something about it that it's like, this is a comfortable, familiar story format. So my kind of brain and everything else is just like, okay, tell me a story. And I know that there's this like barrier, this suspension of disbelief that I'm watching a story. And I felt with The Hobbit, 60 frames per second or 48, whichever it was, you're removing that suspension of disbelief. And suddenly I'm looking at Ian McKellen stood on a set wearing a costume, acting. And it didn't feel like there was this barrier of, here is a story. Here is like, sit down round the campfire and listen to this story. It felt like I was an active real-time participant in a bad way, in my opinion. And that's my thing with high frame rate, is I think high frame rate works for video games, works for live sports, potentially things where you want to feel like you're truly there and it's happening live. It's great for. But I think there's something about 24 frames per second that makes you feel like this is a story and I'm being told a story, and not everything that's happening is literal and real. And I'm not in the scene, I'm being told a story. And there's a real like difference there between like present continuous tense of this is happening now versus this is a story that happened and someone's recounting it. And that's to me what the difference is. And resolution, I'm bringing that up because I think 12K, 16K, a million K, whatever, is more about, that's more to do with being in the room. I think that's great for nature documentaries, live sports, anything happening that's real, and you want it to be really sharp and really a representation of the real world right now and happening. That's that. But I think storytelling shouldn't be that. There should be some sort of a barrier to allow you to suspend disbelief and believe that Peter Pan can fly. You know, it's a different thing. And we will, I think people will figure out ways to advance technology that still allows you to suspend disbelief, but it is a different feeling. And so it's a thing I think about quite a lot. Yeah.
Interesting. So what advancements are you excited about? I mean, in terms of, like, you know, we heard a lot of obviously AI is erupting now. We have you've talked about virtual production. There's a lot of other emerging technologies. Is there something in particular that you generally excited about for the cinematography?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not, like I said, I'm not really interested in higher frame rates. I'm not really interested in higher resolutions. Yeah, I don't know what the next innovation is, and where it's going to come from. It's going to happen. But yeah, I mean, I still, the best, because all of these things I've been saying about innovating, I mean, I'm trying to do that myself, but season 6 of Slow Horses, we went Alexa 35 anamorphic lenses, and we did introduce a sort of digital bleach bypass. So on one hand, I've been quite bold with what that show was, and bold with a digital look that's very kind of analog. But on the other hand, you know, Fincher did something very good and very similar with Seven nearly 20 years ago now. So actually it's kind of an old fashioned thing that I'm just trying to bring back. And with Cape Fear, I've tried to be a little bit more extreme with contrast and HDR and color. And I've sort of ended up doing this quite punchy, poppy, colorful, warm thing, expanding HDR more than I have before, but it still definitely is rooted in analog color. You know, I'm still trying to find the way to innovate with color and just sort of the texture of cinematography. But there isn't an immediate, answer to that question right now. There isn't like a new camera coming out that I'm excited about, or new lenses, or it all happens kind of slowly, I think. And maybe there'll be a breakthrough moment where somebody innovates in a major way, but nothing comes to mind right now that I can think of. Yeah.
Eben, before we wrap up, we have a question that has become a close-in tradition in our show, which is, if you had the chance to change a CG character, a CG environment, or a whole CG world in an existing TV series or film, what would it be and how would you approach it?
The first one that came to mind, I think first thing to say is everything's subjective. No, it's always contentious, I think, to criticize someone else's work, and that isn't what I mean. But just from a philosophical point of view, let's put it that way. The Irishman. I think with The Irishman, I think what they tried to do with de-aging De Niro was fascinating as an experiment, and at times very impressive. But if you think of The Godfather Part 2, it was De Niro himself who benefited from playing a young Marlon Brando. And I think, imagine if The Godfather 2 had been a de-aged Marlon Brando, it would have denied Robert De Niro as an artist having a way to play that character, both doing an impression of a young Marlon Brando and an idea of a young Godfather. And I think potentially The Irishman denied somebody like Leonardo DiCaprio or whoever playing that role as a younger version. And I just thought I thought it was an incredibly interesting idea and a fascinating experiment, but potentially it was using VFX to use VFX rather than artistically, let's say, allowing an actor to do the same thing, which potentially would have been more interesting to me personally, is what I'd say.
I think it's one of these things where the technology did get pushed.
Yes, true.
But actually, after that, it went kind of down. I think the only ones that achieved something different or better after that was Star Wars. With first Peter Cushing, and then in the last reveal of young Skywalker. But that's even like a very different technology what they were using.
And they did look great. They did, yeah. But like you say, like with virtual production, like people have to take these risks and experiment to push the art form forward. And that's how things hopefully get better overall. So yeah.
Well, if you don't do it, then doesn't move, right? All right. Well, if there's one takeaway about relationship between cinematography and visual effect that you would hope audiences or filmmakers remember, what would that be?
Clear and honest communication. That's it. I think it's you've both got to communicate. It's got to be clear. It's got to be honest. You've got to, if I see a shot and something feels wrong about it, I have to speak up. You just, if it feels wrong, whatever that is, I've just got to say it feels wrong, and then I've got to figure out why. And I think, intention and just talking about conceptually, I think I want to do it this way. What does that mean for you guys? How can I help you guys? Blah, blah, blah. And it's just that two-way communication is crucial. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a true pleasure to have you in the show. Thank you for sharing all your story, your work, and your brilliant insights.
Thank you.
I really appreciate
Likewise.
it.
No, it's great chatting. Thank you.